Hello, and thank you for joining our Stream of Conscious ADHD podcast. I'm Heidi Faucette, along with my sister Heather. We are Gen X in menopause and, surprise, newly diagnosed with ADHD. Since we found out about our ADHD during the pandemic, we have spent most weekends sitting in my backyard in Brooklyn with our champagne brunch discussing the impact, the reflections, the grief, the stories. Many adults are now finding they were never diagnosed, so we thought we would bring everyone into our backyard discovery sessions, hoping it will help. We laugh, we cry, we are stream of consciousness conversationalists. We hope you enjoy listening to our discovery and perhaps glean some comfort from it. Here we go, into the backyard. Actually, in this episode, we are not going into the backyard. I decided to take a sidestep for this episode to talk through a few things that just relate to moms with ADHD and their children with ADHD and some of the challenges there that can be exhausting. There just needs to be a whole support group around how to manage these things. And I'm sure there are some out there, but I need to find them. I did a recording a while back that I'm going to play now, and then I'll get into some of the other topics. So here is a recording. Heidi here, ADHD Gen X, and mom of ADHD Gen Alpha. My daughter is 11 years old, and we are going through some struggles right now. One of them is that I realize, and first of all, I wasn't diagnosed until recently, so I didn't know a lot of the ways that I was as a kid was ADHD. Now, dealing with some of the challenges of my daughter, going through the tween stuff just is really hard because this is something that I at times still don't do myself. So it's hard for me not to educate her because I can educate her, but it's hard for me to instill in her that want, that need, that understanding of how to do sometimes basic, sometimes not basic hygiene. I remember as a kid, I never used to brush my teeth. I mean, I did sometimes, but my mother never used to make sure that we did. So I'm on her all the time. And then there's the shower thing, like pulling teeth to get her to take a shower. I feel like now, especially during menopause, I'm even more so. And during the pandemic, even more so. It's like I'm not showing up to work and I'm not doing whatever, so I'm just not taking a shower. But I recognize that I have to at least discuss it with her more. Otherwise, she's not going to do anything. And then the whole forgetting to put on deodorant and forgetting to wash her face and forgetting, well, all the things, the vitamins, anything health related, which goes with self-care and hygiene. I didn't have a parent who stayed on top of me. And so I feel like maybe if I stay on top of her, it will help her do all the things. But then I become a big nag. I just feel like it stresses her out. It adds to her comorbidity of anxiety. But I took her to the pediatrician last week, and I had a little bit of a nervous breakdown in my head. And I think the pediatrician could totally tell because she looked at me like, she's desperate right now. Because it's exhausting, and I've been doing it for so long. And trying to get someone to care about their health, it's freaking impossible. Especially sometimes when I don't have the capacity to do that about my own self. How am I supposed to help my child? And the pediatrician suggested that set a schedule. I'm definitely going to utilize Alexa to help prompt, but Grace sometimes just ignores her. So wish me luck. One of the things that the pediatrician suggested, because we're having a big issue right now, my daughter, she has fear of having a bowel movement because she thinks it's going to hurt because it had in the past. And she just doesn't listen to her body. So, I did some research on it, and it is a thing that if your body feels it and you have ADHD and on your way to the bathroom you get distracted, then, oh, well, there you go. But then physically, sometimes she just doesn't know what it feels like. So That is a big hurdle, but I used to be that way. I used to not go and then be constipated and all the things, but she's been on Miralax for a while because of this, and so it's not that they hurt anymore. She just doesn't wanna do it because she's not comfortable with it, and we were doing really good about it, 6, 9 months, and then all of a sudden, she's back to holding it in again. And so the pediatrician said, "Oh, do a suppository, it will help her go in, like, an hour." And she suggested this because she thought maybe there was some obstruction. But when I went out to get the suppository, when I came back, she had pooped, and it was, like, 14 inches long, and I am not kidding. So today, I told her, "No, I'm not gonna torture you by putting a suppository up your patootie," because I had put myself in my shoes as a kid and then in her shoes, and just knowing her like I do, I think it would cause her trauma, and she's so sensitive about everything. So I said, I'm not gonna put you through that trauma, but you have to poop." And she did. But the struggles, especially not knowing you had ADHD until you're older, and the things you do, and the things you don't do, and the things you thought everybody else did or thought or didn't do. And then your child is doing it, and they say, "Your daughter has ADHD." And then years later, they tell you you do. And you're like, "Oh, how am I going to help her? How am I supposed to be the role model?" So I feel like I'm failing at that. So that was something I recorded a while back. And it was a moment when I realized how difficult it was to be a role model, to lead by example. And I'm falling down on that. I still am. So I really do feel like it's challenging, not only because I have not been able to find good techniques on how to motivate yourself with all the hygiene stuff and to care, but, and I know that there are techniques out there, but it's more about time savings, not really wanting to do it. So obviously, my motivating factor is that I want to be a good role model. So another ADHD symptom that my daughter has, and I've been looking into it, is regarding balance. She, from a very young age, just was not sure of her footing. She doesn't ride a bike, she doesn't ride a scooter. Anything that takes balance, she does not. And this was actually her kindergarten teacher who pointed out her ADHD to me. She said, "One of the ways you can tell is if you see a kid who's still walking up or down the stairs one step at a time instead of putting each foot on a separate step." Anyway, I think you know what I mean. Um, so that's a telltale sign. And there are so many telltale signs now, but I didn't know that before she was 5. She's my first child, and I didn't know the signs. I just thought it was normal kid stuff. But anyway, I was doing some research into it, and it was kind of all over the place, but of the balancing thing is definitely ADHD because balance is required for sensory integration, motor strategies, and cognitive processing. And if you don't have those things, it means that, kids with ADHD who have deficits and executive function uh, dysfunction may lack the ability. So, no ability to modulate motion, motor responses, motor speed, and dynamic balance, which is involved in activities like jumping, running, dancing. My daughter, she has the OT for the first 4 years of school for holding a pencil correctly. So that was a very common thing. And they were saying that 60% of children with ADHD exhibit poor handwriting. In reading a study that was, I think, the National Institute of Health, one of the journals was saying how dynamic balance and children with ADHD and its relationship with the cognitive functions. And the cerebellum, so that part of your brain that is at the very base of your brain, and it's the little tiny part at the bottom, and it's where those functions are. Coordinate voluntary muscle movement, maintain balance, posture, equilibrium, control muscle tone, regulate motor movement, aid in motor learning, calibrate motor commands to the eyes. So, but all of these things I notice the muscle tone, all of it. But even to get Grace to exercise, which is another thing with the health and hygiene challenges, I do not exercise. I'm one of those people who, I think I mentioned in another episode, that I buy equipment and or gym memberships and think that I'm going to do it, and then I don't. So, and having her try to fix her balance by doing some exercises that are supposed to help is challenging because she just doesn't want to do it. And, pushing her into that is just, but they say that doing these balance exercises actually can help other ADHD deficits. And then, how when you forget things like you're writing down a grocery list and then the next minute you realize that much more time has passed and then you have a blank page and you're thinking about something else. And the name for that is just metro of thought. It's when we begin a thought, head in one direction, and end up somewhere else. We've all experienced that. Temporary lapse of attention. But, with ADHD, here's the problem. It seeps into all aspects of life and can negatively impact learning, focus, everything. And that leans into the cerebellum as well. So all of it's tied in to that little tiny piece of brain. So that's affecting both the focus, train of thought, and balance. So because children begin to develop gross motor skills in infancy, this is has to, holding yourself upright, slouching is one thing, but the posture when it is as bad as my daughter's, it's a thing that you cannot hold yourself up, and you're holding yourself up with the wrong muscles. You're not using your core, you're not using your back muscles, and then you end up just being all jammed up. So, then to help my daughter with her posture, she has to do things like the Superman pose and what have you. And again, exercise. So many of these things I have a hard time with, and she does, like exercise, taking care of yourself, healthy eating. Those are all the ways to help with your ADHD, and we're not doing them. But I wanted to share the exercise because this was very helpful because the cerebellum is kind of separate from the rest of the brain and it plays an important role in motor function. It doesn't initiate movement, but it's involved with the coordination, time, and precision of movement. So that's the issue. And it was interesting, although only taking up 10% of the mass of the brain, the cerebellum holds over to 75% of the neurons of the brain. Wow. So from the book ADHD 2.0, I heard a lot of good things about this book. I have not read it yet, but it explores the connection between balance and ADHD and suggests the set of exercises to incorporate balance training, standing on one leg for a minute or until falling over, stand on one leg with your eyes closed for a minute until falling over, and taking your off your socks and putting on your socks without sitting down. And obviously it's good for the core as well. So, aside from programming Alexa to remind her of schedules, especially the morning routine, and trying to do these exercises, and I'm going to do them too because I'm sure it will help me in some respect. But to all the moms out there who have ADHD and they have children with ADHD, just know that you are not alone. Um, it is really hard, especially when you share the same areas that are challenging. I will share any new information that I find that is helpful. And in the next episode, we're going to go back to our regular format where we are in the yard. We'll be in our new backyard since we moved and looking at all the things, talking through all the things, getting distracted by all the wildlife in the yard, etc. So until then. Our reason for this podcast is to support and uplift women in recognizing the impact undiagnosed ADHD has on their lives and to know that they are not alone. Discovery and grieving for what life could have been if we had only known and had help can be hard sometimes. If you have any thoughts you would like to share, you can email us at genx.adhd.sisters@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. #GenX ADHD Sisters.